It's roughly 1300 BC, and your daughter just turned 3. That's the thing you've been dreading, quietly, since the day she was born, because for 3 years, she's been drinking only one thing, and that one thing has kept her alive. Now the milk is stopping, and today she reached for a cup of river water like it was nothing, the way children do, and you had to stop yourself from grabbing it out of her hand in front of the whole street. There's no way to boil it clean. There's no way to know what's living in it. There's no way to explain to a 3-year-old why the water that everyone else drinks might be the thing that kills her. You just watch. That's the job now. Watching and doing the arithmetic in your head that every parent on this street has already done, quietly, without ever saying it out loud to each other. And it didn't start here. It started 3 years ago, on the day she was born, when a midwife had you squat over 2 bricks laid on the floor of your own house, because that's how every single birth in Egypt happened, on bricks, on your feet, with women you trusted standing on either side of you. Nobody in that room was pretending it was safe. There was a knife by the bed. There was a carved hippopotamus figure watching from a shelf. You didn't put it there for decoration. Here's the number that should stop you cold. Bioarchaeologists working a cemetery in Egypt's western desert found that among children who died between 1 and 3 years old, the overwhelming majority, something like 19 out of every 20 examined, show active skeletal damage from anemia and chronic stress. Not old-healed damage. Active, meaning it was still happening when they died. And it clusters at exactly the age children came off the breast. Here's the thing. Nobody tells you about ancient Egyptian childhood. We picture it through gold funeral masks of pharaohs who died as teenagers and cute museum statuettes of naked toddlers with side locks of hair. What we don't picture is the actual arithmetic. By some estimates, only about 1 in 3 babies born in ancient Egypt made it to adulthood. That's not a footnote. That's the central fact of being a parent in the Nile Valley for 3,000 years. The fact sitting underneath every tomb painting of a smiling family that we mistake for evidence things were easy. So today, what did Egyptian families actually do about it? A brick and a knife that got you through the single most dangerous night of your life. A hippopotamus goddess and a dwarf-god standing guard over your bedroom. A weaning age we can now read directly out of a child's teeth. A cemetery in an oasis that tells us more about ordinary Egyptian kids than almost anywhere else in the country. A drawer full of toys pulled out of the sand at a town called Kahun. A will written by a mother who cut her own children out of it. A haircut with a very specific job. And the uncomfortable discovery that keeping a child alive and putting a child to work were in ancient Egypt sometimes the exact same decision. Let's go. The brick, the knife, and the goddess in the room. Start at the beginning, because the danger didn't begin with weaning, it began with labor itself. For most of Egyptian history, there was no bed involved in giving birth. Egyptian texts describe women delivering while squatting, supported by 2 special bricks known as meskinite bricks. And in 2001, archaeologists working a Middle Kingdom mayor's residence at South Abydos found something nobody had ever recovered before, an actual surviving birth brick, dated to around 1750 to 1700 BCE, painted with a mother holding her newborn and flanked by protective imagery. Egyptologists believe it may have belonged to a noblewoman named Reneseneb, someone living in that same mayor's household. Egyptologists had known about birth bricks from texts for a century. This was the first time one had ever turned up in the dirt. That brick wasn't just furniture. Excavators also found fragments of ivory wands nearby, curved pieces carved from hippopotamus tusk, covered in images of protective demons and gods that midwives used to physically draw a circle in the air, or sometimes literally on the ground, around the mother and the space where she'd give birth. And standing at the center of almost all of that imagery was a goddess shaped like a pregnant hippopotamus, standing upright, with the paws of a lion and the tail of a crocodile, a genuinely frightening-looking figure named Taweret. She wasn't gentle. She was built to be terrifying on purpose, because the belief was that whatever could threaten a mother and a newborn needed something more frightening standing between them and it. Households kept her image on amulets, on furniture, in shrines near the birthing space itself, alongside a second deity, Bes, a dwarf-bodied god with a lion's mane who guarded the actual moment of birth and a child's sleep afterward, propped near the crib the same way you might now check a baby monitor twice before falling asleep yourself. Let that sit for a second. An Egyptian household didn't treat childbirth as a medical event you got through with a midwife and hoped for the best. They treated it as a battlefield serious enough to require a knife by the bed, a brick under your feet, a wand drawn in a circle around you, and a monster-shaped goddess watching from the wall. That's not superstition layered on top of ignorance. That's an entire culture being honest, out loud, about how dangerous the first night of a person's life actually was. For both people in that room, the 3-year clock written into the teeth. If she survived the birth, and if you survived it too, the next danger had a very specific countdown attached to it. There's a wisdom text called the Instruction of Any, in which a father tells his son to remember what his mother did for him, that she carried him, and that she nursed him for 3 years, her breast in his mouth the entire time. For a long time, that was just a line in a papyrus, the kind of thing you could dismiss as poetic exaggeration. Then bioarchaeologists figured out how to check it against the body itself. Here's how that works. When a baby is exclusively breastfeeding, the nitrogen isotope ratio in their growing bones and teeth sits elevated above their mothers because nursing effectively puts the infant one trophic level up the food chain, feeding on their mother's tissue. As solid food gets introduced, that ratio starts dropping back toward the adult baseline. Researchers analyzing burials from the Naunakhte oasis in Egypt's western desert tracked exactly this signature across dozens of infant and child skeletons. The result matched the papyrus almost exactly. Supplementary food started appearing around 6 months. Full weaning was complete by roughly age 3. 3,000 years after a scribe wrote that number down as a moral lesson about respecting your mother, chemistry pulled the same number directly out of bone. Let that sit for a second. That's not folklore matching folklore. That's a wisdom text and a mass spectrometer independently landing on the same figure, the oasis that told the truth. Most of what we know about daily Egyptian life comes from 2 unusually well-preserved places, a walled workman's village and a short-lived royal city, and both skew toward literate, state-employed families, people with better food, better housing, better everything than the average farmer on the riverbank. There's a third site that matters just as much, and it belongs to ordinary people. In the Naunakhte oasis, far out in Egypt's western desert, sits a cemetery called Kellis II, containing over 600 burials. It's Roman period rather than pharaonic, several centuries later than the world we've been describing. But the population living there farmed and raised children under conditions that had barely changed since the New Kingdom. No factory food, no modern medicine, the same river-adjacent water risks. So the pattern it shows us is close enough to trust. Of those 600-plus burials, roughly 60% are infants and children, and the skeletons of the youngest carry the same marker over and over, cribra orbitalia, small porous lesions in the roof of the eye socket that form when a growing body is starved of iron, usually from chronic infection, parasites, or malnutrition. Among children who died between 1 and 3, researchers found active lesions in the overwhelming majority of cases examined. Not scars from an illness they'd recovered from. Active damage happening at time of death. The child was still fighting it when it killed them. And here's a detail that reframes the whole picture. Researchers studying the fetal and newborn burials at the same site estimate that roughly 15% of pregnancies never reached full term at all, ending in miscarriage or stillbirth. And those tiny burials were treated with the same careful individual attention as any other family member. Whatever assumptions you're carrying about ancient parents being emotionally braced for loss, walk them past this cemetery first. The toys pulled out of the sand at Kahun. Now, pause on all of that for a second, because it's easy to walk away thinking Egyptian childhood was nothing but danger and grief, and that's not the full record either. In the 1880s, the archaeologist Flinders Petrie excavated a Middle Kingdom town called Kahun, built to house workers on a pyramid project, and what came out of the sand, there wasn't just tools and pottery. It was toys. Wooden balls, leather balls stuffed with straw or horsehair, spinning tops, small wooden sticks resembling tip cats, animal figurines, and a scatter of marbles that researchers think were used as playing pieces for a board game called Mayhen. Elsewhere, at a burial site in Hawara, Petrie recovered a rag doll from the Middle Kingdom, stitched together with real hair, so fragile now that it's rarely put on display. Tomb paintings back all of it up. Children shown running, wrestling, swimming in the Nile, and playing a board game called Sinet, with the same intent concentration adults gave it, the kind of game piece you'd find worn smooth at the edges from decades of hands. Here's what that tells you. Sitting right next to the cemetery data, a child in ancient Egypt who made it past the dangerous years wasn't raised in a household of pure, grim survival. She had a doll. She had a ball made of old rags and leather. She played games with her friends in the street outside a mud brick house, the same as any child anywhere, in any century. The danger was real, and so was the ordinary, boring, joyful business of being a kid. Both things were true in the same house, sometimes in the same year, sometimes in the same afternoon. The mother who wrote it into law, because the record does not support detachment, not even a little. At the workman's village of Deir el Medina, there's a will, an ordinary legal document, left by a woman named Naunakhte. In it, she goes through her 8 children one at a time and divides her property, and she is explicit that some of them get nothing because they failed to look after her when she needed them. It reads less like a fairy tale about ancient family values and more like a furious, precise legal settlement, and that's exactly what makes it real. You don't write a document that specific about people you never cared whether they lived or died. And burial practice backs it up from the other direction. Excavators at the Middle Kingdom town of Kahun found infant remains placed in boxes buried beneath the floors of houses, not out in the formal cemetery with the adults. Similar infant burials show up at Deir el Medina too. The read most Egyptologists favor is that families kept their smallest dead close, inside the home, rather than sending them out to a graveyard treated as a separate world. A child who didn't survive wasn't filed away. They stayed under the floor you walked on every day, under the same room where the surviving children still played with their dolls and their marbles. The haircut that meant something. Now the living children, because Egypt marked them visually, constantly. Egyptian art shows children, almost without exception, with a specific hairstyle, the head shaved bald except for a single thick lock of hair left growing on one side, usually braided or curled. Egyptologists call it the side lock of youth, and it wasn't fashion, it was a legal and social category made visible on the body. Wearing it marked you as a child, someone still under a parent's authority, still outside the world of adult obligation. Pharaohs are shown wearing it in childhood depictions specifically to signal this is the king before he was the king. When a child came of age, the lock was cut. It's one of the very few markers in Egyptian art that tells you a person's status at a glance. No title needed, just hair, visible from across a courtyard. When protection and labor blur together, here's the part of the story that resists a tidy ending, and it should. Survival past early childhood didn't mean safety. It meant becoming useful. Egyptian children entered work early by necessity, in the fields, in household production, in craft workshops where a parent's trade got passed directly down from hand to hand. And skeletal studies of juvenile remains from several Egyptian and Nubian sites show joint stress and repetitive strain patterns in children well before what we'd now call working age, evidence consistent with sustained physical labor rather than incidental play. A society running on subsistence agriculture and no mechanical labor simply could not carry children as pure dependents for long. The same child who played with a rag doll and a leather ball, the same child whose mother nursed him for 3 years to keep him alive, might be hauling water or minding animals by 6 or 7. That's not a contradiction in the record. It's the actual shape of the trade-off. A family that lost a third of its children before adulthood needed every surviving child working as soon as they were physically able, both to help the household survive and because, as Naunakhte's will makes explicit, those children were also the plan for your own old age, the only pension a family like hers was ever going to have. Let's take a step back. Put the whole thing together, and 4 things stack on top of each other. First, the danger didn't wait for the world to touch a child. It started in the room they were born in. A brick under a mother's feet, A knife by the bed, a wand drawn in a circle, a hippopotamus goddess standing guard. None of that was decoration. It was a household admitting exactly how much could go wrong in a single night and preparing for it anyway. Second, the biology after that was brutal and specific. It wasn't random bad luck. It had a shape, relative safety during 3 years of nursing, then a second dangerous window right at weaning, when a child left the one sterile food source in the entire country and started drinking from the same water, making everyone else sick. Families weren't guessing at this rhythm. The instruction of any and the isotope data agree down to the year. Third, the emotional record and the survival record aren't in tension. They're the same record. The will that disinherits an ungrateful child, the infant kept under the floor instead of sent to a graveyard, the sidelock that marked a child as still protected, the rag doll buried with real hair stitched into it. All of it points the same direction: investment, not distance. Fourth, and this is the uncomfortable one, care and labor were never fully separate categories here the way we'd like them to be. Keeping a child alive long enough mattered because that child was, quite literally, both the reason to keep going and the plan for surviving old age. Love and utility ran on the same track, and somehow, in between all of it, there was still room for a spinning top and a game of sonnet on the floor of a mud brick house. Here's what I keep coming back to. A mother in Deir el Medina, 3,200 years ago, sat down with a scribe and made sure her will named every one of her children individually who had shown up for her and who hadn't. That's not distance. That's someone keeping extremely close track of 8 separate human beings across an entire lifetime, in a world where over half of them, statistically, weren't guaranteed to survive to have that conversation with her in the first place. She didn't get to take any of them for granted, not from the night they were born on a brick with a goddess watching the door, all the way through weaning, all the way to the day the sidelock finally came off and one more child had made it. So she wrote every one of them down. So, question for you. If you had to choose, would you rather know your child's risk clearly, the way an Egyptian mother tracking birth and weaning and water and age 3 did, or not know at all and just hope? Let me know in the comments. Until then, see you soon.